Katie Cherkasky with us right now, the constitutional law attorney, former federal prosecutor, in the flesh. We're always talking remotely, but she's here. There's a lower torso to you and everything. It's great to see you. Where does this go, Katie? I mean, what's your best bet first on this idea of some sort of master, third-party observer looking at everything? What do you think?
Well, the DOJ's filing really tells us what I think we already knew, which is this is a document dispute, but they kind of brush over how significant that is. But because President Trump does have or did have declassification authority, that is something that really will be litigated all the way, in my opinion, up through the Supreme Court.
Really?
So, in terms of actually moving forward with any sort of indictment, if that's really what they're looking to do, there was some suspicion that maybe they were just looking to get back these documents. But I think the filing last night shows that they're really interested in maybe pursuing this criminally. And I think that it's going to be.
That's a tough one, isn't it? I mean, you have to prove that. And of course, they've been hinting that he might have obstructed justice here. He did argue that he'd given them everything they wanted. That is, that when it began with the National Archives, and that there's nothing here. And they obviously felt differently and found stuff there that he said he didn't have. So does that mean he lied to them?
Well, I think that a dispute about the ownership of documents, especially from a former president who had carte blanche authority over them, is not an obstruction. If there really is a dispute about what he should or shouldn't have had, that's something that, again, is not comparable to any other government employee, any past prosecutions. It's something that I think is going to be a very difficult road in terms of a prosecution. Now, in terms of the other people involved, including attorneys that made representations, that could be a different story in terms of their own liability. But for former President Trump, I think that there's got to be a more significant analysis of the actual jurisdiction that the DOJ thinks that they have to indict him for offenses that are connected to his time in office. Because even though now he's obviously not in office, these documents were all from his time there. He's claiming he declassified them. He does not need to prove he declassified them. This is a criminal forum. He does have a presumption of innocence. The DOJ would need to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that he didn't do so. And of course, there are other offenses that don't discuss the classification level, but really any release of executive branch information was really within his authority. So I think it's going to be a difficult thing to actually get to an indictment phase. But
so his saying that he didn't have the documents they wanted, and then to sort of turn around and say, well, I declassified it anyway because I was the president at the time. It's clear that he is going to be treated differently than anyone else who was in this situation. And that's where he comes in and says, well, I'm being treated far differently than a Sandy Berger was, who had documents in his pants, or certainly the Hillary Clinton situation where he argued she got off very, very lightly. What do you think of that?
It's just totally different analysis in my mind, because a president has, first of all, they don't possess a security clearance whatsoever. They are the clearance or classification authority. And so they don't have.
But the issue here, too, is does that remain when you're a former president?
Well, I think what we need to remember is that the documents that he had were taken from his time as the president.
In office, right.
So at what point does that turn criminal according to the DOJ? I think that they could attempt to issue an indictment, but I think they're going to run into really constitutional issues on the vagueness side of things in charging because of his authority. So any other government employee, even at the highest level, is subject to laws regarding classified materials.
I'm reading between everything, and you're the genius here, I'm not. But I've watched a number of legal shows, so I think, as I told you, I qualify, that there is no criminal charge that's going to come his way, whether people feel he deserves it or not. It's just not happening. I don't see it.
I think that there's a sustainable prosecution based on the evidence that we have. Now, I think
unless they know something or uncovered something we don't know. I mean, this was a heavily redacted affidavit.
Well, exactly. And I think we have to remember that in a criminal form, it's a proof beyond a reasonable doubt standard, which is very, very significant. And the DOJ knows that. Merrick Garland knows that. And I don't think they want to pursue a prosecution that they cannot win. And this is far from a guarantee in that respect. Now, for the other folks involved, including the attorneys, as I mentioned, that made representations, there could be some trouble for them potentially, but it's very specific to the actual timing of how these things took place before there could ever be an indictment that issued, in my mind.
So real quick, if you don't mind switching gears, because I meant to ask you this when last we chatted, and that is how credible it is to you that President Biden did not know that this was coming down, or that anyone at the White House didn't know this was coming down, because that face value, we do know that the White House counsel's office was aware of the pleas from the National Archives folks. Hey, we want our documents. These are missing documents. So it does seem to bend credulity. But what do you think?
It absolutely bends credulity. The president is the owner of the executive branch, if you will. I mean, the DOJ, Merrick Garland, serve at the pleasure of the president. He is ultimately in charge of any sort of justice that's enacted out of the executive branch. So I don't believe that, in terms of keeping things nonpartisan with the DOJ, yes, there's certain appearances, but I think we're far past that point. We all know that this is very political, whether it's criminal or not also may be the case, but President Biden owns the DOJ. That's his agency, and he has the authority.
They had to realize the magnitude of this. We are going to raid a former president's home. I mean, it might be wise to get some people in the loop on that.
I would think that he should insert himself a bit more. I think that their strategy was to look like they're so totally uninvolved and that it's not political, but I think it's backfiring because it's so unbelievable, and it's totally, as you mentioned, bends credulity to suggest that the White House was not involved with something so unprecedented and so political. Regardless of the underlying alleged criminal offenses, it's political through and through. This is based upon Trump's actions while he was in the White House, and it continues to be something that is a debate regarding his powers as the executive. So it's certainly political regardless of what the White House is trying to make it appear to be.
Katie, you're great. I always learn so much, and great to see you in the flesh. Good luck with that. And Katie Cherkasky on all these developments. We'll be monitoring this and what news we're getting out of the Justice Department, and for that matter, Trump's legal folks and what they're having to say on this. Again, this push for a third-party observer to look through all of this.